The conference room smelled like lemon polish and old ambition. I'd walked through that glass door for 17 years, usually with 3 reports in one hand and a coffee in the other. But that morning, something felt off. No printed agenda on the table. No screen showing logistics projections. Just Alan Ryers at the head of the table, already seated arms crossed too tightly to be casual. I took my usual seat, third from the left, the one with the chair that squeaked slightly if you leaned too far back. No one met my eyes. Not Janice from Ops, not Martin from Financial Planning, just silence. Alan cleared his throat, folded his hands, and looked at me like I was already halfway out the door. Seraphine. Let's keep this brief. The words landed like a slap. I waited. Surely this was about some reorg announcement, maybe new software integrations. I'd heard rumblings of expansion. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and read from it like he was reciting a weather report. Effective immediately, your role is being restructured. We are grateful for your many contributions. A transition team has been assembled to ensure continuity. He didn't even say my title. I blinked my jaw slack for just a second too long. Excuse me. Alan didn't look up. Colton Ryers will assume your former responsibilities. Colton, his daughter's husband, married 6 weeks ago and onboarded 5 months before that. The man who once confused a regional distribution center with a shipping vendor during a strategy call. I stared at Alan, not trusting myself to speak. I glanced around the table again. Still, no one would look at me. Cowards. We've arranged for a full severance package. HR will walk you through it. 2 security guards in company polos stood in the hallway trying to look invisible. Their presence was the final punctuation mark on the sentence. You are no longer welcome here. I stood slowly, not rushing the moment. I adjusted my sleeve, straightened my blazer, and let the silence stretch long enough to hurt someone. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass, composed, unreadable. The kind of woman they assumed would nod and vanish quietly. I kept walking past the framed awards, the mission statement, the glass that still bore the fingerprints of everything I'd built. My office still smelled like eucalyptus oil and ambition faint traces of the diffuser I used to run every Monday morning. Everything was just as I'd left it. Files stacked neatly, 3 color-coded trays, a mug that said, built to solve. It was obscene how normal everything looked. I moved slowly as if touching any of it too fast would shatter the illusion that this space still belonged to me. I opened the cabinet behind my desk and pulled out the framed photo of the original team, me, Alan, and 4 others grinning in front of the first server rack we'd ever deployed. I slid the print from the frame and left the rest. It wasn't worth carrying the weight of what had changed. Next came the small brass train token my grandfather had given me when I'd accepted the job. Build something that moves, he'd said. I tucked it into the inner pocket of my coat. I turned to the corner where the rubber plant I'd kept alive through fluorescent lighting and freezing weekends stood tall. It had always been half an afterthought, something to fill space, but now it felt like the only living thing in the room with any loyalty left. I carried it gently, dirt and all. The door opened without a knock. Kara Ellison, my assistant, stood there. Her eyeliner with smudged lips pressed together like she was holding back something sharp. HR said I report to Colton. Now she whispered eyes not quite meeting mine. Effective immediately. Of course they wasted no time. She took a step forward. My dad's medical bills are piling up. I can't afford to lose this job, Seraphine. You won't, I said. Just protect yourself. Get everything in writing, every request, every direction. Keep records, always. Kara nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. I reached out, squeezed her forearm. Her pulse fluttered beneath my fingers. She opened her mouth to say something else, but my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it. Then I saw her face shift, as if she sensed something had changed. I answered. Seraphine Nolan, I said, steadying my voice as I stepped into the fading sunlight. The response came instantly. Miss Nolan, this is Loretta Fing, CEO of Zenith Corps. I stopped mid-step outside the revolving doors of Harkwell Tower. Her voice was precise, almost surgical, like she never asked questions she didn't already know the answer to. I understand you've had a shift in circumstances today, she continued. I'd like to meet, tonight, if you're open. I hesitated for the length of a breath. Where I'll text you the address, come as you are. She hung up. 3 hours later, I stood on the 27th floor of a rooftop lounge nestled between mirrored buildings, Denver's skyline humming around us. The sun was bleeding behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the Manston River. Loretta was already seated in a corner booth, wearing a crisp white suit and dark red lipstick as composed as a closing bell. She stood when I approached, shook my hand. Sorry to hear about this morning. You don't sound that sorry. A small smile. I admire precision. A server placed 2 glasses of something sparkling in front of us. I didn't ask what it was. I won't waste your time, she said. I don't want you to work for me. I want you to work with me. Full partnership, equal say. Build something smarter than Harkwell from the ground up. I blinked. That's bold. Not bold. Calculated. I've watched Harkwell for years, watched you hold it together. Today was their mistake. I intend to capitalize on it. I took a slow sip, letting the chill burn. My non-compete is thick. Only on direct solicitation, she said. My legal team already reviewed it. There's a path. I leaned back, studying her. She was everything I wasn't: flashy public, always at the front of the panel. But I could tell she'd built her empire the same way I had, brick by careful brick, while dodging every man with a shiny jawline and no memory. And if I say yes, I asked. Loretta raised her glass. Then we start with a client they never should have let you build. I spent the next morning at my dining table, legal pad, open contract binder, spread across 2 chairs. The original offer letter from Harkwell was still crisp untouched since the day I signed it. I flipped to the non-compete clause highlighted in bright blue by Loretta's team. At first glance, it was restrictive 2 years full industry embargo, including freight logistics and strategic systems support. But the language was careful, almost smug in its specificity. No active solicitation. No direct recruitment of current clients, no disparagement. The one thing it didn't cover: inbound interest. If a client came to me of their own accord, without my pitch, without my initiation, it lived in a gray zone the lawyers love to exploit. Loretta's legal team mapped the boundaries in a memo titled Feasible Engagement via Passive Availability, a mouthful but effective. That afternoon, I filed a consulting license under Nolan's Strategy Group, built a landing page with just my name, credentials, and a basic contact form. No pricing, no offers, no case studies, just a clean slate. I wasn't marketing, I was existing legally. By evening, the domain was live. My inbox was empty, but I didn't expect fireworks. Not yet. Instead, I moved carefully. I called a graphic designer I trusted and asked for a plain digital signature. I registered a separate email domain. I signed up for encrypted cloud storage. Everything built to live in the shadows, present but quiet. I didn't touch Harkwell's systems, didn't reach out to anyone in their orbit. I simply stood still and waited, because I knew the industry, and I knew something they didn't. The systems I designed weren't flashy. They didn't scream innovation or sparkle in boardroom slides, but they worked, they scaled. They survived, and without the right person maintaining them, the gaps would widen slowly then, all at once. I didn't have to knock down their tower. I only had to turn on a light across the street. And by the next morning, that light caught someone's attention. 3 days passed in silence, the kind that doesn't echo, but hums beneath your ribs. Then just after lunch, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in months. Lyle Marston, VP of Network Strategy at Everride Freight Alliance, Harkwell's flagship account. The one we'd built from the ground up together, the one I'd defended in a dozen boardrooms. Seraphine, he said, skipping pleasantries. We're doing a quiet review of all strategic vendors, off the record. I didn't respond right away. He knew I knew what that meant. We're not making any assumptions, he added. But the recent shift at your former shop, well, it's raised some continuity concerns. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. I understand I'd like your read on a few things. Architecture, compliance risk. No names, just insight. I agreed, carefully, no contracts, no scope. Just a conversation between 2 professionals who'd spent too many nights syncing freight routing algorithms over cold takeout. After we hung up, I opened a blank document and started typing. Nothing emotional, no commentary, just clinical surgical observation. Line by line, I outlined potential risks, mismatched systems across distribution nodes, lack of updated SOC documentation, vulnerability windows that had grown since I left. I flagged gaps I knew Colton wouldn't even recognize, let alone fix. I never mentioned him by name. The report came out to 27 pages. I attached it to a clean email with a neutral subject line and sent it just before midnight. No follow-up, no copy to Loretta. The next morning, Lyle's reply was short. Appreciate the clarity, this helps a lot. That was it. But later that day, Loretta forwarded me a chain from someone inside Zenith Corps' legal team. Dominion was preparing to review Harkwell's renewal terms, quietly, strategically, but they were moving. And it wasn't just them. By dusk, 2 other client names I hadn't heard in over a year had hit my inbox with vague inquiries about availability and insight. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch like I'd learned from them. The first message came at 9:14 a.m. Kara Colton's asking if the routing schema for Everride was ever finalized. He says he can't find it anywhere. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The schema wasn't just finalized, it was embedded, tested, and triple validated across 4 failover paths. I'd spent 3 weekends tuning it, but I didn't reply. 3 hours later, another message. Kara Board's nervous. Delays on the Chicago and Atlanta lanes. Investors are starting to notice. Still, I said nothing. I wasn't interested in theatrics. This wasn't sabotage. I hadn't touched a single file. I hadn't whispered a single word. What they were dealing with wasn't a breach. It was a vacancy. They hadn't removed a title. They'd removed a system of memory, institutional rhythm, context they didn't document because they never had to because I carried it in me. While they scrambled, I moved forward. I reached out to 4 people over the course of 2 days. All former Harkwell staff, all quietly displaced during realignments that favored flashover function. I didn't pitch. I didn't promise equity. I just asked one question. Want to build something better? Every one of them said yes. Caden from Data Integrity, who used to pull double shifts during audits and never missed a flaw. Nadira, who had rewritten half the vendor API codebase in a weekend, only to have her promotion blocked twice. Jules Quiet and Razor Sharp, the one who found the critical bug in the inventory loadout system 2 hours before go live and got no credit. And Mina, the analyst, who ran simulations in her sleep and always kept her whiteboard cleaner than mine. I brought them in slowly, legally. No one still under contract, no poaching, no press. We didn't rush, we didn't brag. We just started building. And while we drafted infrastructure maps and revisited compliance gaps, Harkwell kept spinning, slowly losing altitude. That week, I received a 3rd message from Kara. Kara, he's blaming disorganized legacy files now. I put my phone down and opened a fresh notebook. On the top line, I wrote one name, Everride. The text came just after sunrise, Loretta. It's time. I didn't need more. I refreshed my newsfeed and saw the headline bloom across every logistics and tech blog I followed. Zenith Corps secures multi-year $52 million, partnership with Everride Freight Alliance. Just beneath it, Harkwell loses flagship client amid executive transition. I sat with the words for a moment, letting them settle. They didn't feel like revenge. They felt like math. Unbiased, clean, inevitable. The stock markets opened an hour later. Harkwell's shares dropped 11% in the first 15 minutes. By lunch, the number had doubled. At 2:37 p.m., Kara's message buzzed through. Kara Board asked if you'd consider returning consulting basis. For stability. Their words. I read it once, then again. They hadn't asked for me when they pushed the papers across the conference table and said I was no longer aligned. They hadn't asked when Colton stood in my seat with nothing but a LinkedIn profile and a family tie. Now, they wanted stability, but they had mistaken my silence for pause. It wasn't. It was choice. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I forwarded the blog link to my team, Caden, Nadira, Jules, Mina. One line followed it. Good work, all of you. First milestone met. By evening, the public statement from Everride made its way to my inbox via Loretta. It was a single paragraph, but every sentence had weight. We're investing in innovation that reflects deep expertise, not inherited position. Continuity matters. Execution matters more. No names, no accusations. Just truth wrapped in press release language. Across the river, the lights in Harkwell Tower flickered like an old marquee. I watched from my apartment window tea and hand rubber plant still thriving in the corner. The same one I'd carried out on the worst day of my professional life. And as night settled over the skyline, I saw what they never had. Not the flames of destruction, but the steady light of something rebuilt. The call came just after 6 as I was steeping a bag of chamomile and watching the headlines scroll quietly across my second screen. My phone buzzed twice before I answered. "Alan," I said without warmth. He cleared his throat. "Seraphine, thank you for picking up." There was no small talk, just that clipped, practiced executive tone I'd heard him use in boardrooms when trying to control a leak with a smile. "I'll keep this brief," he said. "I think we've both seen how quickly things have shifted." I let the silence stretch, let him sit with the discomfort of needing something from me for the first time. The Dominion deal was unexpected. The media coverage hasn't helped. There's concern, internal and external. He paused, then offered what I knew was rehearsed. "We'd like to offer you a strategic advisory position. Remote, high level, no heavy lifting. The board believes your presence would project confidence. Your name still holds weight." I took a sip of tea. Let the flavor linger. "You want to use my credibility to steady a ship you sank," I said calmly. "It's not about blame," he said quickly. "It's about continuity." "No," I replied. "It's about reversal, and I'm not interested." He hesitated. "Seraphine, let's be reasonable. You didn't lose me, Alan," I said, setting my cup down. "You replaced me. There's a difference." He exhaled long and low, like he'd been holding it since the market opened. I didn't wait for him to respond. I ended the call, placed the phone face down on the table, and turned toward the window. Across the river, the top floor of Harkwell Tower, once Alan's domain, was dark. The glowing logo that had once lit the skyline now flickered like a faulty signal, struggling to stay visible. And still, I felt no triumph, just a steady clarity, like a light finally turned inward. The documents hit 3 industry blogs simultaneously, anonymous sources, but the timing was too perfect to be accidental. Screenshots of internal emails flagged audit omissions, and a timeline that showed exactly how quickly Colton had pushed through the acquisition of a flashy freight startup one that it turned out had no proper compliance protocols in place. The deal had been his first major move. It was also the one that started the unraveling. Regulators announced an informal review by mid-morning. By early afternoon, whispers turned into questions at shareholder meetings. The same executives who once smiled across the boardroom now scrambled behind closed doors. Kara's text landed at 4:08 p.m. "He's stepping down. Colton. Alan, too. Official word drops tomorrow." They're bleeding. I stared at the screen for a while, unmoved. I didn't feel victory. No glee, no vindication, only stillness. I walked to the window of my office, now 3 floors up in a converted steel mill that hummed with new energy and the sound of people who actually built things. Across the river, Harkwell Tower looked strangely dim, like the power had shifted, and the building itself knew it. The same top floor that once held executive lunches and investor calls now sat in shadow. The logo still blinked faintly, trying to hold presence against the twilight. I thought about the binders I'd left behind, the systems no one ever really learned. I thought about the months I spent preparing handoffs that no one ever asked for. And I thought about the man who had told me I wasn't aligned with the company's future. And now that future was collapsing under its own weight. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward the blog links. I didn't reply to the 6 messages sitting unread in my inbox asking for comment or perspective. Instead, I picked up my train token from the desk, turned it between my fingers, and looked past the river to where the tower once represented everything I'd built. Not because I missed it, but because I knew what I was about to build next. I placed the brass train token on the edge of my new desk. It caught the morning light and threw a warm reflection across the hardwood surface, like it was marking territory. Beside it, the rubber plant stood tall leaves, glossy green, resilient, still thriving. I poured water into the pot slowly, the same way I used to sip coffee before a high-stakes demo. Measured, intentional. The room was quiet, except for the distant hum of the development floor below where my team was finalizing rollout specs for our newest logistics framework. I reviewed the contract one last time. A full systems architecture overhaul for a major freight consortium. This time the front page didn't read "Prepared by Harkwell Global." It didn't carry someone else's logo. It said Nolan Strategy Group, and beneath that, my name. I signed it cleanly, no hesitation. Not as an employee, not as someone supporting someone else's vision, as the architect. Loretta stopped by later with 2 mugs of black coffee and a raised eyebrow. That deal will turn heads. Let them turn, I said. I'm not hiding. Across the river, Harkwell's tower still stood, but it no longer cast a shadow. The logo was dim, the top floors dark. The silence from their side was almost tender now. Not bitter, not loud, just quiet. I returned to my desk, scanned the dashboard displaying our next 3 client phases, and minimized the window. The air felt lighter, like a breath held too long, finally released. I reached for the train token again, holding it in my palm the way I had 17 years ago on my first day. The edges were smoother now, worn from travel and time. I could feel its weight, but not as a burden, as a compass. They thought they fired the operator, I said quietly, almost smiling. Then I placed the token down beside the plant, sat back in my chair, and let the hum of forward motion carry me into the next blueprint. Because they had never understood what I really was. I wasn't just the one who ran the system. I was the engine.